When the fifth angel blew its trumpet, I saw a falling star fall from the skies to the earth. This star held the key to an abyss so deep and terrifying. When the crater burst, a dense, choking smog billowed out like the gigantic belch of a colossal furnace. The sun itself became an ember, and the once clear sky became a gloomy veil, enveloped by the ominous smoke from that evil pit. A swarm of locusts erupted from the eerie fog, wielding malicious power comparable to that of venomous scorpions found in the earth's darkest regions. The instructions they were given were chilling: spare not the gentle grass, fragile plants, or life-giving trees, but instead direct their ruthless attention to those unlucky people who lacked the sacred seal of God engraved on their foreheads. These tormentors were forbidden to bring about a quick death. Instead, it was their mission to inflict interminable misery for 5 agonizing months. The pain they delivered was reminiscent of a scorpion's deadly sting, striking with ruthless accuracy. People will long for sweet release, for the comfortable embrace of death in those horrible days, but it will elude them, a cruel and ruthless specter. They will yearn to be free of the never-ending agony, but death will play a frustrating game of hide and seek, remaining forever out of reach as they suffer, stuck in their never-ending nightmare. This horrifying section is based on Revelation 9 verses 1 to 6. It is a truth that will soon occur, not a script from a Hollywood film. In fact, many movie script writers receive inspiration from scriptures in order to generate blockbuster films in Hollywood. But I'm not going to bore you with a fanciful scenario, but rather with the truth of our day and the possibility of the not-too-distant future. You see, the horrifying tragedy of the locust onslaught is far from over. Let me now finish the story in Revelation 9 verses 7 to 11. The locusts resembled war-ready horses in appearance. They wore sparkling golden crowns on their heads, their faces distorted into horrific parodies of mankind. Their hair flowed like women's, yet their teeth shone like lions, ready to rend and tear. They wore iron breastplates and emitted a loud roar, like the thunderous charge of numerous steeds and chariots charging madly into a cruel combat. Their tails were adorned with scorpion-like stinging stingers, and within those venomous tails lurked the horrific power to afflict unlucky souls for a torturous 5-month period. And presiding over this demonic swarm was the abyssal angel, known as Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek, names that evoke the essence of annihilation and destruction. This gloomy queen, the personification of despair, commanded the locusts on their never-ending mission of misery. As people stared at the vivid imagery of these swarming locusts, the Bible's tale of Moses and the 10 Commandments sprang to mind. It was the story of the 10 plagues that were visited on ancient Egypt as divine punishment. Indeed, in the biblical story, Moses, a famous prophet and Hebrew leader, is chosen by the divine to meet Egypt's Pharaoh. Moses issues a harsh warning to Pharaoh, arguing that unless he frees the Israelites from slavery and allows them to return to their homeland of Canaan, Egypt will face a series of deadly plagues. The Israelites' presence in Egypt dates back to an earlier period. They had arrived in Egypt at the request of a pharaoh, and their patriarch Jacob played an important part in this journey. However, their status transformed from that of welcomed guests to that of enslaved people over time. This transition took place under the reign of a pharaoh who became resentful of the Israelites' growing affluence and strength, eventually submitting them to the severe yoke of bondage. Despite growing up in Egypt's royal court, Moses finally finds his actual Hebrew ancestry and receives a divine calling from God to lead his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt and towards their ancestral homeland, Canaan. This key point in the story sets the stage for the 10 plagues of Egypt to begin. The 9th plague was caused by locusts. Moses, serving as God's messenger, informed Pharaoh that a swarm of locusts would come on Egypt, engulfing every tree and devouring all available vegetation. Each time Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to release the Israelites, a fresh plague descended on his country, exacerbating his people's misery. The Book of Revelation is a highly symbolic and apocalyptic literature written by the Apostle John that borrows strongly from Old Testament imagery and prophetic traditions. Interpreting Revelation merely as a code for contemporary events or individuals, such as associating locusts with Apache helicopters, is speculative and contradicts the book's intended purpose. Revelation's symbolism was intended to convey spiritual and theological lessons, to bring encouragement and hope to persecuted early Christians, and to provide a look into God's ultimate victory over evil. Rather than seeking to force modern interpretations onto its old and symbolic content, we can acquire a greater appreciation of the book's rich theological issues and eternal truths by investigating the ties to the Old Testament and understanding the symbolic language utilized by John. The vivid and precise portrayal of locust swarm devastation adds to the metaphorical potency of locusts as agents of judgment in the Bible. The advent of a locust swarm was a terrible event in agrarian civilization, where people relied primarily on crops for subsistence and livelihood. Farmers' powerlessness in the face of such a persistent and destructive force is important to comprehending the psychological impact and dread connected with the biblical idea of a locust plague. The Bible frequently employs recognizable and powerful symbols from everyday life to express spiritual and moral themes, and locust devastation serves as a dramatic picture of divine punishment and the consequences of disobedience. It emphasizes the idea that when confronted with such enormous powers, human efforts alone are fruitless, and one must seek relief and atonement from a greater power. A striking comparison between the locust plague in Exodus and the symbolic locusts in Revelation will establish thematic consistency between these two biblical texts. In both instances, the iconography of locusts is used to represent divine judgment. The locusts were brought as a plague to Egypt in the Exodus tale, and they destroyed the land and its people. They were part of a series of plagues designed to force Pharaoh to free the Israelites. The locusts emerge from the abyss as agents of God's judgment in Revelation. However, their specific command not to harm the earth's vegetation but to torment those who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads underscores the idea that this judgment is directed towards the wicked and unrepentant, not God's faithful followers. This distinction is consistent with the biblical theme of God's protection for His people even in the midst of divine judgment. This analysis highlights the nuanced and layered nature of biblical symbolism, where similar motifs and images can be used to convey different theological messages depending on the context and purpose of the text. An intriguing link exists between Jeremiah 51's oracle of devastation against Babylon and its position as a symbolic entity in the book of Revelation. In biblical symbolism, Babylon does play an important role, portraying earthly powers that fight God and His people. Babylon is described in Revelation as a sign of decadence, revolt, and spiritual depravity. The echoes of Jeremiah's prophecy in Revelation 18 and the description to Babylon as a flaming mountain in the second trumpet judgment demonstrate the Bible's use of this imagery throughout. The parallels between Jeremiah's warning concerning Babylon and the descriptions of locust-like animals in the book of Revelation are intriguing. These parallels highlight the symbolic and thematic ties between these works, as well as the concept of divine judgment and disaster. The imagery of locusts or locust-like creatures is utilized in both cases to illustrate the overwhelming and destructive nature of God's punishment. In the same way that a swarm of locusts might devour a field, God's punishment on Babylon and people without the seal of God is depicted in Revelation as similarly catastrophic. Furthermore, the thought that individuals with the seal of God on their foreheads represent the church adds another layer of interpretation, emphasizing divine protection and preservation of the faithful in the midst of the judgments and sufferings shown in the book of Revelation. The interpretation of the psychological destruction caused by the demon locusts in Revelation is consistent with the text's metaphorical and apocalyptic nature. While the imagery in the book of Revelation is typically striking and unsettling, it frequently contains deeper spiritual and psychological undertones rather than focusing primarily on physical destruction. The idea that the locusts cause psychological agony by making individuals desire for death but unable to find comfort emphasizes the sense of torment and despair. Joel's book begins with Joel discussing a major issue in Israel. It's not about locusts, which eat everything like grasshoppers, chapter 1 verses 2 to 4. Instead, he's using the locust problem to describe what the terrifying day of the Lord will be like. God will judge not only his adversaries, but also Israel, if they do not repent on this day. The enemy's army will be fierce, with lion-like teeth, Joel 1 verse 6, they will resemble powerful war horses, chapter 2 verse 4, and the sky will darken, 2 verse 2. This wrathful army is compared as a swarm of locusts, Joel 2 verse 25. God will cleanse Israel by getting rid of what is wrong, just as locusts left Israel with no vineyards. This concept is used by John in his writing to convey how terrifying the Lord's final day will be. He offers a more terrifying picture of a locust problem that appears to have sprung directly from hell. I appreciate your viewing.